You wake up tomorrow morning, normal Tuesday. You reach for your phone, check your bank balance, same number it was last night, but when you try to buy coffee, your card gets declined. Not because you don't have money, because the money stopped meaning what it used to mean overnight. The barista's confused. The app is glitching. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., inside a building with no windows, people in very expensive suits are making very quiet phone calls. This isn't a zombie apocalypse. No bombs went off, no war started. The shelves are full, the lights are on, but something broke. Something most people never think about, never question, and almost nobody can explain. The U.S. dollar collapsed. And here's the part nobody tells you. It wouldn't look like a disaster movie. It would look boring at first, like a software update that went wrong, confusing, bureaucratic, almost embarrassing in how mundane it seemed. And then slowly, it wouldn't be boring at all. So let's actually think through what happens. Not the screaming headline version, the real version. Step by step. Before we get into the collapse itself, we need to understand why the dollar is the dollar. Because it isn't just American money. That's the thing most people fundamentally miss. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. That sounds like a fancy credential on a resume, but what it actually means is this. When Brazil wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they don't pay in Brazilian reals, and they don't pay in Saudi reals. They pay in US dollars. Two countries that have nothing to do with America, conducting a transaction that has nothing to do with America, and they're using American money to do it. This happens every single day in every corner of the world for almost everything. Oil, priced in dollars. Grain, dollars. Copper, lithium, soybeans, pharmaceutical ingredients, dollars, dollars. Dollars. This is called dollar hegemony, and it is arguably the single greatest geopolitical advantage any country has ever had in modern history. It means the United States can print money, run enormous deficits, and borrow at low interest rates because the entire global economy is essentially addicted to dollar liquidity. The world needs dollars to function, so they keep buying them, keep holding them, keep trusting them. Now, what happens if that trust breaks? Let's back up even further, because to understand a collapse, you need to understand how the system actually works, and it is stranger than you think. The dollar isn't backed by gold, hasn't been since 1971, when Nixon made one of the most consequential economic decisions in history, and essentially said, the dollar is now backed by faith. Faith in what? Faith in the United States government, its institutions, its military, its economy, its ability to pay back what it borrows. The Federal Reserve, which by the way is not a government agency in the traditional sense, it's a quasi-private central bank, controls how many dollars exist. It can create dollars essentially by typing numbers into a computer. When the pandemic hit in 2020, the Fed created roughly $3 trillion in a matter of months, not printed in the physical sense, just conjured. Now here's the uncomfortable math. The U.S. national debt is currently sitting at over $34 trillion. To put in human terms, if you spent $1 million every single day, it would take you approximately 93,000 years to spend $34 trillion. The U.S. government adds roughly $1 trillion to that debt every 100 days right now. And yet, the dollar is still the world's most trusted currency. Why? Because everything else looks worse by comparison. The euro has political fractures. The yuan is controlled by an authoritarian government that the world doesn't fully trust with reserve status. The yen is propped up by its own wild monetary experiment. The British pound is, at this point, more of a historical artifact than a global force. So the dollar wins by default. It's the cleanest dirty shirt in the laundry. But winning by default is a fragile kind of winning. So tomorrow it collapses. What does that actually look like? First, let's define what collapse even means, because it doesn't mean the dollar becomes worthless overnight. Currency collapses are rarely singular events. They're cascades, dominoes, each one making the next one faster. A true dollar collapse would likely start with confidence, specifically the loss of it. Imagine foreign governments and central banks, which collectively hold about $7.4 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds, start quietly selling, not all at once, but enough. Bond prices fall. Yields spike, meaning the U.S. suddenly has to pay dramatically higher interest to borrow money. Higher rates ripple through every mortgage, every car loan, every corporate debt in America simultaneously. The stock market doesn't just dip, it craters. Now the Fed faces an impossible choice: raise rates to defend the dollar, which kills growth and triggers a depression, or print more money to stabilize things, which devalues the dollar further and makes the crisis worse. There is no good option. There is only which pain do you choose. Meanwhile, and here's where your Tuesday morning gets weird, the price of everything starts moving. Gas goes up, then groceries. Not because supply chains broke, because the dollar is buying less. A gallon of milk that cost $4 is now in real terms worth something closer to $6, then $8. Then the stores start putting stickers over stickers on the price tags because they can't keep up. This is hyperinflation, and it doesn't happen in a month. It can happen in weeks. Germany saw it in 1923. Workers were paid twice a day because the money lost value between morning and afternoon. Zimbabwe lived through it in the 2000s. Venezuela is still living through it. The playbook is always the same. The currency loses credibility. People flee it. The government prints more to compensate, which destroys credibility further, which causes more flight. A spiral, perfect and brutal. But here is where the dollar collapse becomes genuinely different from every other currency crisis in history. Because this isn't Argentina, this isn't Turkey, this isn't even Weimar Germany. This is the reserve currency, the spine of the global financial system. And when the spine breaks, everything attached to it breaks too. Countries that hold U.S. treasuries as their national savings, Japan, China, the UK, South Korea, suddenly find their reserves are worth a fraction of what they were. Their own economies convulse. Their central banks have to make emergency decisions. Their governments face political crises. Global trade, which is priced in dollars, grinds into confusion. What do you pay with? What do you price things in? There's no backup system ready. The SWIFT payment network, which runs on dollar rails, starts experiencing what the financial world politely calls extreme stress. Oil-producing nations who have sold oil in dollars since the 1970s petrodollar agreement suddenly want a different arrangement. But different from what? There's no consensus. Some say gold. Some say a basket of currencies. Some say the Chinese yuan. Everyone argues. Shipments slow. Ports get backed up because importers and exporters can't agree on pricing. Supply chains, which are already fragile post-pandemic, snap. And the United States, the country that got to essentially export its inflation to the world for 80 years because everyone had to hold dollars, suddenly has to absorb it all domestically. That is the quiet brutality at the center of this scenario. America got a tremendous free lunch for decades. The reserve currency status allowed it to borrow cheaply, spend freely, and keep the engine running on credit. The collapse isn't just an economic event, it's the bill arriving, all of it, at once. Now, and this is important, let's pump the brakes a bit, because there's an enormous industry built on dollar collapse panic, gold sellers, crypto evangelists, doomsday newsletter writers who charge $299 a year to tell you the end is perpetually 3 months away. They've been saying this for 40 years. The dollar is, in many measurable ways, more dominant today than it was in 2000. It accounts for roughly 58% of global foreign exchange reserves. Cross-border loans are denominated in dollars about 60% of the time. It is the lingua franca of global finance in a way that has proven remarkably sticky. De-dollarization, the idea that the world is moving away from the dollar, is real, but it is slow. China, Russia, Brazil, and others have made explicit moves to trade in local currencies. The BRICS bloc has floated a common currency. These are real trends, but trending away from and collapsed are separated by a distance that would take decades to close under normal conditions. So, the more realistic risk isn't a sudden overnight collapse, it's a slow erosion, a gradual loss of confidence measured in basis points and percentage shares, a decades-long decline from dominance to one currency among many, which sounds less dramatic but might actually be more dangerous, because it's the kind of thing that happens slowly, then suddenly, and by the time most people notice, the adjustment has already been made for them. That said, the overnight scenario? Not impossible, just unlikely under normal conditions. The key phrase being normal conditions. Here's the uncomfortable question underneath all of this. Is the current dollar system, the one built at Bretton Woods in 1944, reinforced by the